are supposedly coming, but since I'm not certain, Mr. Hirsch, when they'll be here, we're just going to get started. I'm Jack Weiss. For the record, we're joined by Councilmember Zine and Councilmember Smith. Colleagues, the one item that we can do on consent this morning is item 5, which is grant.
That's fine.
Smith?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've moved item 5 to council on consent, and we will otherwise go through and hear the 4 items, 1 through 4. Mr. White.
Item 1, Police Department to present verbal report relative to the status of DNA testing, backlog, and cold hits.
Morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Take away,
Morning.
Mr. Matheson.
Greg Matheson, Los Angeles Police Department Crime Laboratory Director. I start off with some good news in that the backlog of rape kits that were requested for analysis went down this last week from 243 to 230. 13 cases were signed off, and is one of the first times that we've exceeded what came in, which is a sign of the additional personnel and the fact that we're getting more people online and trained. Unfortunately, the other backlog of unrequested kits continues to grow because more are coming in, obviously, every week. It increased by 11 cases from 7,166 to 7,177. Last week, 11 new kits came into the possession of the police department. That takes our total of all of our backlog cases to 7,712. Continues to grow. One of the other indicators of the additional capacity that we have is, along with the cases going out the door, the number of cases we can assign that are being worked on. And at the moment, in both screening and profiling, we have a little over 300 cases assigned and in progress with the staff that we have on hand, which is probably the highest we've ever had.
When you say 300 cases assigned, what does that mean? That means that they're in one stage of work or another in your lab?
That's right. They've been given to an analyst. An analyst at some point is working on that case.
300 divided by how many analysts who have them assigned to them?
Right now we have about 20, I wish I had that number for me exactly, but about 24 that are currently working. So they all carry a caseload of about 15 cases at any one time.
That are at different stages of the process?
Correct.
From early to...
At whatever point, or there's a waiting review, but that's a good thing that we have that many in progress. It just means we have a lot of people working on the cases at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Matheson.
Okay, Lieutenant Morris, Robbie Homicide Division. Our total hits are down this time versus last year the same time, with the exception of homicide hits. We have a total of 162 versus a total of 201 last year, for a 19% decrease. Homicide hits 21 versus 20 for a 5% increase. Sexual assault hits 90 versus 102. Cold case sexual assault is handling 51% of those. Rape special section is handling 12%, and the divisions are handling 37%. All other hits, which include burglary, robbery, and other types of crimes, are down 35%, 51 versus 79, same time last year. And of the 162 total hits, RHD personnel are handling 37% of those hits.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant. Colleagues, do you have any questions for the Lieutenant or Mr. Matheson?
No.
On this, their final report of the summer. Appreciate what you do very much, and in the fall we'll hopefully work with you to make sure we can help you put the best budget package possible forward in the police department. Hopefully that'll also be successful in the mayor's office and then hopefully in council, so that you can get even more resources for what you do this coming year.
Great. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. White.
Item 2, Public Safety Committee, Board of Police Commissioners, and CAO reports relative to the proposed distribution of X-26 tasers for use by the field police officers.
Great. We get to welcome for the first time this committee Deputy Chief MacArthur. Welcome, Chief.
Welcome.
Congratulations
Good morning.
to you.
Thank you. Deputy Chief Sandy Jo MacArthur, Department.
Matt Crawford from the CAO.
So
So, good morning, and I'm here to answer. There were some questions about the deployment, and I understand now maybe a few budget questions. So, do you want to ask questions, or do you just want me to?
Why don't you give a brief overview?
Mr. Chair, is Mr. Parks going to be there? Because he had some concerns about this matter, and if we could hold it till
I
he
mentioned
arrives.
at the beginning, and then Mr. Hirsch nodded to me and Mr. White that Mr. Parks was coming. And
If
then
we could hold this, because I know he had some questions on it, instead of doing it twice.
Repeating it?
That's fine.
Because he asked originally that it be held.
Okay,
Is that right, Ms. Nagel? Mr. Parks has a question? Okay. Then if you could wait for a second.
sure.
Thank you.
All right, garages, Mr. White.
Item 3, Police Department report relative to changing the boundaries of police divisions and Department of Transportation traffic areas, the impact of such changes on local zoning, and location of permanent official police garage jurisdictions pursuant to motion Wesson Smith.
And I should note that CD10 is present today. If CD10 wants to say anything about this, feel free to come forward. Mr. Tefang.
Good morning, members of the committee. Richard Tefang, Executive Director of the Police Commission, and joining me is Detective 3 Ben Jones, who's the detective who supervises and oversees the OPG operation. The report basically addresses the motion that was submitted by Councilmember Wesson, seconded by Councilmember Smith, related to an evaluation and review of the current OPG boundary system. As the report indicates, this goes back, the boundaries and OPG construct in the city of Los Angeles, approximately 70 years. Historically, each of the police areas within the city of Los Angeles had its own official police garage. Several years ago, after a lawsuit, that process was developed through an RFP. Individual garages had to respond, were selected, and serve an initial 5-year contract and then a potential for a second 5-year renewal of that contract, maximum of 10 years, and then it must go out for an RFP purchase again. The only change to this process was when the 19th area, Mission area, was created several years ago. Because we had an existing contract at the time, it was seen the most logical way was to split that boundary and to have 2 OPGs service that area. That was the initial effort in that particular construct in the city of Los Angeles. And all reports to us, and checking with the area captain, at the time Captain Albanese, and continuing to speak with Captain Villegas, who is the area captain in Mission now, that's worked fine for them. They have not had any issues, and it continues to serve the department, the community well. The report recommendation is that we continue to keep the boundaries as they currently exist. And that recommendation is basically founded on the concept that we have the same service area we're utilizing. We're not getting more land mass. We're basically divvying up the land mass we have. One of our concerns from a staff perspective is if you continue to shrink land mass as new police areas expand, as you know, the 20th and 21st areas are coming on shortly. What will occur is several things. It'll be driven by a variety of factors. One, the OPGs must have available land to be able to place their facility and the storage area that's required under the current contracts. That land mass in the city is not that available. So by keeping the current construct of the OPGs, we basically do not have to have OPGs going out and trying to find that land mass and then purchase the land mass on the hopes that a potential new contractor will get a contract. So we think by keeping the current construct, that works well for us. Secondly, it gets down to the need of having good, viable contractors who can service an area for the long term. And that's basically based on the amount of business that they receive. And if we shrink the landmass down, some of the geographic areas would be a lot of residential, such as Topanga area, and the landmass there, although large, the kind of service that an OPG would generate would not be that great. As you also know, we do service beyond LAPD. It's the Department of Transportation. And I believe we're about 50-50 in tows and storage. Is that correct, Ben? So 50-50 is DOT and LAPD, and we monitor the program for DOT also. So our report recommendation is that the City Council, based on the motion, would adopt the current areas as the official OPG areas, with the understanding that there are going to be times when we need to slide a reporting district here or there because of geographic boundary switches. As you know, now with the 20th and 21st area coming on board, we're working with the department And our goal is to have no more than 2 OPGs service one policing area, and that the department has shifted some boundaries, and we're working with them to make that occur. So with that brief overview, we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have specifically to the report.
Well, as a co-author on this, I fully understand the problems that you're facing, that the OPGs are facing. And another element, too, is that these people that have these companies are required major investments in material and trucks that cost a lot of money and have to be amortized out over a long period of time, and their business models are greatly affected by our moving our boundaries. So I just think it's a fair way to do it, a logical way to do it. And as you said, we just don't have the properties available. I've had one OPG in my area, Devonshire Division, that actually has a lot in Simi Valley outside the city limits because you can't store and you can't find more land in Devonshire Division. So it's a logical assumption. I fully support it.
Mr. Parks?
Let me give you another view.
Yes, sir.
Is that it wasn't the first time we made the change. If you go back to '78 when Southeast came online, we had then the issue of the OPG that was handling 77th take over Southeast, and then the logic from the police commission was we shouldn't have one OPG handling 2 areas, so they split them and created the 18th. With all the discussion in the reports, that's missing is the convenience to the community, and that's why the view was to have 1 per. And I think with the report, if we move forward on it, we're getting right back to the reason why we were sued, and that was that we created a isolated group of people that kept business forever and ever and ever, and no one had a ability to get into the business. And although the speculation might be accurate about land mass and shrinkage and all that, I think we put ourselves in a bad position if we don't at least put out a request for information and let that dictate whether there are viable people to then come online. If you do it just arbitrarily, I think you just walk down the path of another lawsuit where people will say, closed shop, people get it for 10 years, they keep it for 20 years, it passes through. But it seems as though when the new stations come on, and just like the mission, it should be an RFI, go out and say, is there any interest in providing this service? Then if no one has an interest, if it's not a viable product, then option 2 is use the existing area. And I think otherwise, I just think you're headed down the path of what created the lawsuit in the first place. And I think on the issue of the heavy-duty tow, those I think are always viewed as regional. I don't think anyone ever thought you'd have a heavy-duty tow in each of the stations, and so there's used so infrequently in some parts of the city that there's an expectation of delay and travel, and so you only can go where the heavy-duty tow exists, and I don't think you're going to find people create a heavy-duty tow service for one area of the city if there is no workload. But I think on the issue of the individual stations, I just think we're making some conclusions that may be accurate, except they'll be the very thing that people will sue us about if you don't give people an option of at least applying, putting forth their case, and you making a decision whether it's viable. That's, but the thing is, it's kind of a change in logic from what we went from '78 when Southeast opened. It was an automatic decision to say, give it to the 77 garage. And then the view was, no, let's go back and reassess it to have 1 per. And they took Southeast from 77th, and it ran that way until Mission. But I think I think we have to protect ourselves so that folks that think they should have a business or believe that they should get into this select group have at least an option to apply.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Zine. By the way, for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Parks, in case the record hasn't figured that out, and Mr. Ray.
Unlike years past where the contracts seem to go forever, there's now renewals. And I understand in 2009 there'll be RFPs for all the contracts, for all the OPGs.
I'll let Ben address that. He's much more expertise in that area than I am.
Right now, the first 5-year period for the OPGs is going to expire. Commission staff will send a recommendation to the City Council with an evaluation of the current 5 years, and the city council will decide whether those contracts should be renewed for an additional 5-year period, which is just one that they can, or should be sent for bid.
Is it the council or is it the commission?
The council.
And the $289,000 annual cost, how's that going to be evaluated with the RFP to reduce the cost with those contracts?
The $289,000 fee, we are in the process of trying to negotiate in the new contract and place into the new contract that certain fees that the city is currently paying to the OPGs we would not pay. Additionally, for instance, like when a vehicle is seized for evidence for a 48-hour period, the tow for that 48-hour period and the storage costs would not be paid by the city. And if the person did not come pick up the car after that time period, then normal storage fees and things of that nature are one of the things, and these are all in discussion phases. Certain reduction in tows for when a vehicle is impounded and later a hearing officer determines there is no probable cause, that the OPGs would not charge the city the full amount of that particular tow. And so we're going to try to, just addressing those two things, we could reduce that $289,000 significantly.
Okay, I found that the service has been great throughout the city, speaking to officers. I think they have a nice program working. I know in the past it was, as Mr. Park said, a long-term. It seemed that it was never turned over. And a few years back, they decided to go in to explore and come up with different contracts. So, I mean, as far as my concern, as we continue to add police divisions, the territory will be shrinking, which hopefully will give better police response. But at the same time, as you mentioned, Topanga is a mostly residential area, and I don't know how much business there would be in a residential area for an OPG to even establish. So I support the Commission's recommendation on it.
Mr. Reyes.
Yes, and reading the motion, and hopefully I apologize if I missed some of this discussion, but District 1 has 6 divisions, okay? We have a large percentage of the M1 zones in my district as well. I have about 2 or 3, I think maybe 4 OPG facilities in my district. And my question is, in this analysis, are we going to, I'd like to see some type of relief. I don't know how many council districts can claim they have 6 divisions with so many M1 zones. The impacts in my communities are very, very intense. Has there been any discussion, however, has anyone even noticed that there was 6 divisions in District 1, or that we have all those M1 zones in one district? Was there any kind of discussion in that regard?
We didn't discuss the particulars of that many M1 zones in your district. One of the things that we are discussing, and we continue to discuss with the OPG Association with the OPG zoning, is making that the OPG facilities community environmentally friendly, and so they don't look like junkyards and things of that nature. And that's one of the things that we're doing there. We're also, and not particularly in your council district, but I know that we did have a problem with one OPG with the number of trucks going through residential neighborhoods and things, and they installed a GPS system onto their tow trucks. They made no-fly zones for their trucks, where they had to take major thoroughfares even though they're not shorter. And also there was a notification to the OPG owner if they went into that zone, and also if they did, they contacted the community and neighbors. And that's something that I'm looking at that we should do in those densely populated areas, particularly that. Now, as far as moving them outside of your district, the LAMC, as it currently reads, that the OPGs must serve in the, must be physically located in the geographic area they serve, and that's one of the recommendations that we think that we can change.
Well, this is what I find. I find that the Northeast Division meets up with the division that serves the east side, that meets up with the division that serves Central, and it all converges on the river. Right near Chinatown, Lincoln Heights, and Cypress Park. I mean, there's a confluence there, not only of the river, but of all the OPGs. And it's like they picked a little corner to serve all those divisions, all concentrated in, I'd say, within a mile or two of each other.
And that's the land use issue.
Right. So, because we invested millions of dollars on the river plan and the whole riverfront district, and you have our own city facilities right in the middle of it. I mean, where is this going today? Is this just a report? Are we going to, I mean, what's going to be the, Mr. Chair, what are we doing with this today?
Well, we're presumably approving, Mr. Tiefang, why don't you tell them what we're approving?
New policy.
It's in the recommendation.
The recommendations of the report, sir, in response to the motion would be the committee would approve the report, and then the city council would direct the city attorney's office to to draft the necessary amendments to the LAMC to establish permanent OPG boundaries, and then the report would certainly go to city council for final approval. And also that we would, every 5 years at the police commission, do a review of the boundaries, just as we did this time, or sooner, as directed by the Board of Police Commissioners. I think it is not intended to address the concern that you have, Councilman Reyes, as it relates to the landmass designations within the various councilmatic districts as to where the OPGs could locate. If that were to occur, we'd have to have zoning areas changed so that they could move, but currently they're located in appropriate zoning areas for their respective
Well,
operations.
that's one perspective. Another perspective is to look at how this type of use can be allowed in a range of zones so that you have more flexibility. Instead of changing the zone, which is almost impossible, I mean, you're right.
Weird.
You're looking at it. I hear you, Greg.
We met the enemy knows us.
That's right.
Mr. Reyes, I just want to add one thing. The OPGs are not in the M1 zone by rule. They're there by ordinance. And
Okay. So I hear you. So what I like to do is I want to make sure our operations are efficient. I'm not here to hurt the operations of our public safety. That's not my intent. But if we can look at a range of different types of zoning classifications that can give us more flexibility to decentralize this concentration I have in this area, because I already have 3 divisions with OPG facilities in one area for 3 divisions, and that's a little bit punitive, I think, in terms of what it's doing for those neighborhoods. So I'd like to do a motion, and I'll bring one in that speaks to that range of flexibility, but my question is, do I have time to do anything about it now, or do we have this 5-year period? I mean, what's the staging like in terms of this 5-year cycle?
The absolute Hollenbeck contract is 100% going out to bid. Because it's in its second 5-year term, which is in that area, and that's the particular the one. The other ones we have until probably second quarter of next year, calendar quarter of next year, to make any changes to the contract before they start expiring.
I don't want to shoot from the hip, so to speak, at this time, but I do want to assess that if we can come into my office and we can have that discussion and maybe put forth a motion.
Absolutely.
That makes sense. And I'd like to figure out a way of creating more flexibility so that everyone can carry their fair share of these types of operations.
Absolutely. We'll reach out to your officer and schedule some time to go over the item with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Parker.
Let me just ask to clarify, did I understand you say that we do 5 years and then they basically can reapply, and then the second 5 years a mandatory RFP? Is that the way
Yes.
the process works?
Yes.
Okay. All I'd ask you again, if we look at the process in the sense of convenience to the public, which
Absolutely.
we're supposed to be doing, I would suggest, and you guys have to manage it, that you would keep the boundaries per geographic area and use as a backdrop, if you have no request for interest, that you then can alter it and go into this plan. But I think if you, with the process the way it is, we're getting right back to where we were, because all of the arguments about the investment, the amount of land, all those will be there when the next RFP comes up, and the startup business will say, the guy that's done it for 10 years got the inside track. We'll say they're doing a good job, and eventually they'll get it for 5 more years, and then 10 more years, and then 5 more years, and then 10 more years, and pretty soon somebody will say it's a closed shop, you can't get any business. But I would just hope that you'd consider having an ability to inquire, and then based on the lack of interest, lack of land, and those things, that you make a decision to go to option 2, which is the boundaries where you share as you're doing admission. But I think if you do it up front, I think you're just asking for a lawsuit down the road.
Okay, well, with that,
Recommend remove the item, approve the item.
any objections to moving the item forward?
I don't have objections if they consider what I asked.
Absolutely, sir.
With that consider, Mr. Reyes.
Last question. Let's assume these changes occur and we have more flexibility in locations. How quick can that be turned around? Is that a 10-year period, a 5-year period? Is that a matter of just how we looked at the language for RFPs and RFQs? I mean, how does it fit in?
It depends. If new contractors came in, it'd be within them as assuming a contract. If the incumbents awarded the contract, it would represent a significant reinvestment for them to move their facilities.
So that's part of my problem is they're already entrenched in there, and that has to change.
Because of some of those people are here. If you don't mind, I'd like to talk to you.
That's fine. Okay, I'll leave it alone.
In the last 10 years, how many OPGs have we changed?
3, I believe.
3 out of 18.
Yes.
So it's not a closed shop. We are allowing new people in. We've kicked some out.
Yes.
So I think it's an important thing that there are changes, and maybe what you need to look at, and it's not certainly going to happen in today's immediate issuing of RFPs, but eliminating aggregation in a certain geographic area, and say we encourage people to move out of there, or else encourage bidders to come in. Bigger problem, though, I think, is we haven't had a lot of bidders on a lot of these, have we?
For the last 2 we've sent out, which were the heavy duties, we have not.
None. Yeah. So it's not a large world of people trying to get the business.
I think
like it. Yeah. And the lawsuit came in a contested geographic area, not that if citywide people are clamoring to get into this business. So I think we have to put it in the context of the real world, and that is there's not a lot of people trying to get these, and where we can, we ought to encourage them to move out so we don't aggravate them all in one area like you've got. And that's a logical policy decision, but it won't happen overnight either.
Yeah. I don't disagree on the issue of the heavy duty, but I just think we need to find out, because there are people that are out there looking for viable business. We can guess they're not there, but the way to prove it is to put an RFI out.
I have one follow-up. What's the initial cost for the land, the trucks, the storage, et cetera, to set up an operation?
It's several $1 million.
Several $1 million. Okay, thank you.
All right, with that, with the consideration that's going to be given to Mr. Parks' question, the fact that these folks are going to meet with Mr. Reyes to go over his issues, we will move the item unanimously forward to council, recommend council's approval. Mr. White, next item.
Item 2?
Oh, yeah, let's go back to item 2, tasers with Chief MacArthur. Now,
Stunning
Mr. Parks
report,
is here.
by the way.
We held this for you. We held this for you.
Just for you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna try.
But don't feel
Sandy
compelled to
Joe
ask
was
any
ready for
questions. Don't feel compelled to ask any
Oh,
questions.
no,
Or follow-ups.
or follow-ups. I have one question.
Yeah,
Only
I'm sure he
one?
does. You're only going to face one question.
One
Mr.
question and
Parks.
12
But it's all day.
follow-ups.
That'd be a long one.
I've got all day for you, sir.
I just had some questions. The one thing we went.
Well, she was going to, she wouldn't give a chance to just do a brief overview. Let's let her do that. And then he'll ask his one question. In Mr. Parks's worldview, one has many component parts, and so you will.
Correct, and I understand that. We've worked together before. I was just going to do a quick overview because one of the concerns that I understand was regarding the deployment of the X-26. As you recall, when we first pushed this forward in 2006, we were asking about a rollout plan for 7,500 tasers to replace over time all of the tasers, and that would allow us to actually assign a taser to each individual, including supervisors and detectives in operations. So that was our original goal. As it started to move through with budgetary processes and such, we had a 6-year plan where we'd have approximately 1,250 purchased each year. And our after doing all of the testing for the X26s, because of the donning and doffing concerns and the issue of the taser holster, which is very similar to a holster for our firearms, the best way to deploy these would be to assign them to individual officers. So that was originally how the department set forth. We've rolled out in 06 and again in 07, and we were waiting to find out when we were going to actually get the tasers, because fortunately our deployment in the department continues to rise a little bit. We designed a deployment plan that would be based on actual needs, so it's percentage-based. So we have the total number of tasers, the total number of individuals in the geographic areas, and then we do a percentage plan. We have not updated it yet because we wanted to wait until we got closer to actually purchasing the tasers. So we will, again, update that plan. And therefore, based on the percentage of officers assigned to each geographic area, that would determine how many X26 tasers are assigned to that division. And then upon that response, we would ask the commanding officers to just how we deploy people per watch based on needs, radio call needs, and call load. We would also have them deploy the X26 per watch. So if we have 33% of the officers on day watch, then 33% of the tasers that are going to be assigned to central area would go to that watch. So that is how we did the initial plan for deployment. When the concerns came up about whether or not there would be enough tasers to go for all of the basic cars, which there's approximately 168 basic cars, we then decided that the guidelines for the commanding officers would be that every quarter they would make adjustments based on it, on the officers assigned to which watch. So we would cover initially, we'd ask the captains to deploy one taser to an officer assigned to each basic car, and then we'd go to the X cars and the L cars and supervisors, and then the remaining tasers would go back to the A cars. So we would make sure that all the basic cars were covered. Additionally, we still have approximately 750 M26 tasers that, when fully charged, still do a good job, and we would then realign those and assign a certain number per watch. So if there was a day when an A car, for whatever reason, the officer didn't, the officer who's assigned to that car does not, he's on days off, he's on vacation or something along those lines, then the watch commander would assure that one of the M's would be assigned to the basic car. So that was the way we designed our guidelines after we had heard that there was some concern. So I just wanted to do that quick overview and then go ahead and ask questions.
Mr. Parks is just going to ask his question.
His question.
There's no time limit on this. The thing that concerned me is we had a in-depth discussion during Budget and Finance on this issue, and the whole premise that we thought we bought into was the department's report that said their goal was to put as many of these in the field as possible because they're going to save X number of dollars of liability and things. And so people disputed whether we could validate the dollar amount, but we said, okay, fine, we'll go with it. We couldn't afford the $7 million. But what concerned me was that when I read this version was that it was going to leave it up to the commanding officer of the 20 areas or 21 areas, which then means that if someone, as we will find, didn't have the taser at the time they needed it, then we'd have to evaluate it whether the 20 areas, what policy they were using. And it also, and I don't know if this is accurate, it said that the other tasers were in the kit room and they were used per incident or something, which gave an impression they were locked up and you went to get them as opposed to they were being deployed. And so I just wanted to make sure that when we gave that direction at Budget and Finance that our goal was that every taser, if possible, should be in the field. And then we heard reports back that they wanted to give it to individuals because it somewhat, with the new ones, you can track the usage. It was then identified with the person. The problem is if you do that, it's in a locker whatever number of days per year when you may need it in the field. And so it was just unclear whether those directions of getting the tasers in the field and the maximum number was going to be followed, and did we have 20 policies on deployment or did we have a department policy on deployment?
Well, I didn't get the detail that you just gave me, but I did get bits and pieces of your concerns. We had two concerns as well. We don't want tasers sitting in a kit room. And that was it sounds like that was the impression that was given to you.
That
with
was on the older ones.
The old
That's
report.
the impressions that we got out of the report.
The guidelines that we're giving them is to deploy the M26s to augment, to make sure every car out there, every watch has a taser in it as best we can. The problem I know you're well aware of, and I think everybody here is well aware of, is we're struggling really balancing the M26s and getting them fully charged between the different watches because we were trying to deploy them. We had several cases, and I think that was brought to your attention 2 years ago, that we'd have the tasers out there and they weren't as effective because they were not fully charged. What we can now do is, with the augmenting of the X26, we can now assign percentage-wise a certain amount of M's to each watch, so that they can augment and help make sure that we have each one out in the car, and then the other tasers during the town time can actually get the rechargeable charge, which is what we're having. Just like all of us with cell phones, if you don't charge it properly, we don't have the proper use of it. So they were never to be locked up in the kit room. They were always to be deployed, but what was happening is we were having a lot of problems with them because they weren't being properly charged. And of course, they're getting older. So this will help us really ensure that each watch has a set of X26s. The watch commander and the supervisors are going to be responsible to ensure that their M26s are deployed. In some cases, we may have two people in a car with tasers in that situation, but our goal is to ensure that every car that goes out to start their watch, that we have a taser, either an X26 or an M26. The reason we want to ensure that every 3 months the kit room does an audit on who has tasers is because we do know people change watches. And we don't want one watch to be heavy with the X26 and another watch to be light. So that's the rationale. One of the issues, as all of you know, is we have to get everybody trained in the X26. That's part of when we go to a new piece of equipment, and the company requires that. So what we've already done is we've offset the concern about bringing everybody out of the deployment in the field to training, and we have our adjunct instructors in each division. So it will be very easy for the training coordinator, when they do their quarterly inspection, to say, okay, two of us, we're on different basic cars, there's no taser assigned to this basic car, and they've been using the M, they can realign it, and they can do the training right there in the divisions. Because our goal is to have every fieldable taser out there. And the other piece, because a lot of concern is we have Metropolitan Division, we want them to have the tasers because they're doing so much deployment in crime-fighting deployment. We've made sure in this deployment plan that they are included as well. So they have a cache of X26s as well as M26s and several of our other specialized details as well.
Because we're roughly about 2,000 tasers.
When we get them to get combined, correct.
And the thing is it's probably very infrequently that we have 2,000 people in the field at any given time.
Unfortunately, correct.
That's true. So the issue is that, I think that's the issue of how they get rotated is one thing. The other thing is that when the report reflects that some officers they take them to the field and leave them in the car, that's another kind of issue that reflects that it won't be there when you need it. And again, it could end up being, if we have 20 policies, which was the big issue, then how do we manage it? Because you'll have some incident occur and a division will say, I'm following my policy, not quite what you intended it to be, because we've allowed each captain to decide what the policy is. And I would just like to make sure that we have a department
standardized
policy
guidelines.
that's
Yep.
standard, that if somebody's not using it properly, if it's not in the field appropriately, then everybody knows that. And it's not, I can go back to my division and my captain did something separate and apart of what was intended. Otherwise, all of this money and tasers and what we believe are going to save money in the sense of litigation goes by the wayside because somebody leaves it in the car, chooses not to take it, division changes the rules. That's the kind of consistency I think we talked about at Budget and Finance.
Yes, and Chief Pasinger, I've actually talked about this as we get ready to roll out the X26s and the concerns. Whatever the reasons, there's no more excuses for the M26s to be sitting anywhere. And we've been reinforcing that with the commanding officers when they're reviewing any non-categorical, and we do it with the categorical reviews as well for the use of force investigations. If we find that the taser's been left in the car, we're asking them to deal with it from a perspective of counseling and discipline versus a tactical situation, because they had it and it was in the car.
And then I think the other one was we haven't purchased these yet, right?
No, we've been waiting for approval from all of you.
And again, I don't know if it exists, but one of the rationales of why we should give it to individuals, because it hooks on the belt and then you got to take it off the belt, is whether we can purchase a holster that snaps on the belt and you can unsnap it and put it back in the...
We do have, the holster that comes with the taser does snap on and off. It's a plastic holster. It was not designed to come on and off 3 times a day, 365 days a year, and that was one of our concerns. However, we've looked at that. And it doesn't snap on and off easily because it's a very tight fit on the Sam Browne because of the width of the opening on the holster. So we actually did look at that in terms of, is this a better way to deploy it? And it was prior to your concerns coming up. We looked, okay, should we do it this way? The other problem is we have, a lot of times by doing that, we'll have tasers come in because of overtime issues, and they'll come in and they'll actually be sitting in the room, in the kit room, because they weren't there at change of watch to swap them out. It's kind of like the shotguns. We need enough to rotate through. So we did look at that, and we felt this would be a better way to begin the deployment. Because it's new and because we're hoping over time with the budget process we'll continue to be able to get a new influx, we will reevaluate it and see, is this the right way to do it? I do think that ideally, if we had holsters, we could holster everybody up and they were ones that could stand the belt, it would probably be a little easier to do it the way you want to do it. But in this case, we are also finding with the X26 in our pilot that people are more comfortable with them because they're on their belt the whole time. They're there. They know it. It's not, do I have it strapped to my leg? Don't I have it there? So we don't have any of the issues about them being left behind or not being used. So we really are watching this, and we're going to watch the use of forces and see if we have additional deployment, because as you know, we have about 150 deployments of the taser a year. We're going to see as we do the individual issuance if that starts to go up, and we'll do some readjustment if we need to at that point.
And I think the other issue I'm concerned with is that all we need is the one incident that doesn't have a taser. They could have had one. And I would rather buy more holsters if the snap breaks than having one incident that we could have used it and saved us millions of dollars that we didn't have to shoot someone. And so I think the issue of the snapping holster may be a convenience or inconvenience, but the goal is to get as many of these in the hands of people. And even if somebody doesn't, with overtime, doesn't quite get there in time, I would hope the supervisor would get the car that didn't get a taser back to the station to get one. Because we've been told, or at least that's the way your report reflects, the more that they're in their hands, the less liability we may have. And so my goal is to see if we can have a department-wide dispersal, and that we can have, in addition, department-wide, that they are, whatever we have to buy, when we buy them, that there's more convenient snap-on equipment so that it can be easily dislodged, and that we go forward with a approach that everybody knows, because as we move from division to division, you don't want people to learn 20 different processes for tasers. They should be fairly consistent to know what they'd expect from transfer to transfer.
Well, and you're correct, and that was one of the reasons when we do need to standardize the guidelines so that every division does the same deployment in terms of assigning percentage-wise, because when an officer who's been assigned to a division, if they transfer out, that taser stays with the division, so we don't end up having a stockpile in one division.
I agree, but I think the issue is when that officer goes to the new division, they have the similar rules, so they're not coming in and saying, Division X said do it this way, and Division Y. It's a consistency of how we move equipment, but the key is the maximum in the field, every watch, every car, so that we are getting the best use of that investment. And the likelihood, unless something changes, we're not going to be able to guarantee you or even consider over the next year or two whether we can give you allotment 2, 3, and 4 to get to 7,000.
So no, we understand that.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what we want to make sure, that we have a consistent guideline for everybody to comply with.
We will have this consistent guideline because now that we're assigning to each individual and having the training being conducted at the divisions, they have to be trained based on our curriculum, which will all have the standardization in it.
When you give it to the individual, it means it's not there when they're working, when they're not working. I'm
and I
still
do,
looking for the pooling.
I do understand your concern.
Ms. Parks, one way maybe we could address some of your issues would be to incorporate some of them into the report back to council. In other words, I believe there's either a recommendation here, or if not, we'd like to include an instruction on reporting back to council on how I guess to this committee, how things are going. Are there specific items you want addressed in report backs, Mr. Parks?
Pooling has to be one of them. Otherwise, they're in the locker when you need them, and the maximization of them in the field. Those are the two key factors.
I heard the first one, but I didn't hear the second one.
The pooling of the tasers.
I heard that one.
And the maximization of them in the field on every watch. Those are the two key issues.
Well, as I understand, the plan is...
But just quick, can we include those in report backs
Yes,
as items you report back on?
yes.
Is this going to go back to Budget and Finance again, or?
It wasn't planned to go to budget. We just captured it when it came to council.
Okay.
Mr. Zine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The issue that Mr. Parks brought up, it still remains an issue that they're going to be assigned to officers. And if those officers are in training or on a day off or vacation, they will still remain with those officers in their lockers. They won't be reassigned when those officers aren't there, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Which is an issue. A training day takes place. Everyone's at a training day. Other officers come in, Christmas party, holiday party, whatever. No one's there. Other forces come in. They don't have them. There's a question about how we're going to get those out in the field if they're assigned to the officers. Like a motorcycle officer, he's on vacation, his motorcycle sits in his garage. They don't put it out for someone else to use. That's a concern. The other issue is on the X and the M. Is it easy to identify which one's the X, which one's the M?
Yes.
Okay.
The X is about 60% smaller, and there's just no comparison.
And the battery capacity of the M's, I know it's been a serious problem, where they don't hold the charge. Is there a way with the new version to hold the charge longer?
There is not an issue. It charges itself, so there's no issue with the charge. And the holding of the charge, we found out in most cases, are the batteries hadn't been replaced properly, and in many cases they're not being charged properly because of trying to get them out in the field. So then we have tasers in the field that aren't fully charged and aren't working to capacity.
Okay.
So we've been working with all of the training coordinators specifically on that. To address the concern about coverage during training days and so on and so forth, one of the issues is if you have the percentage, we found this usually works fairly well with the UPR deployment and also the shotgun slug deployment. Divisions will come in and bring with them their tasers, but that is one of the reasons we still have the M's available, so that we can try to really augment that piece. I am hearing your concerns. What we'll do is look into the holster aspect of it, and the only other question I have is when will you want that report back, and is that going to hold up the purchase?
No,
I think the purchase goes. We just want to make sure it's deployed properly when
Okay.
we get them.
And then the other question I would have is, because we're going to be doing the quarterly inspections of this, if we could have the first quarter to look and see how it's going?
Oh, absolutely.
I think you can have all that as long as the word pool is a part of it.
Okay, and I do have a concern about it, because that is not how we've designed anything.
That's exactly why we're here today.
So,
That's exactly, when we read it, it was inconsistent with what directions.
I'm with you.
And why the word pool was not part of the program, are all those issues Mr. Zine commented, I commented on. We don't want to invest $2 million and find out the very day we need it, they're in the locker.
okay, so okay.
We could go purchase them, but we certainly like to have that consistent program articulated before they get deployed.
Okay.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, and I totally agree with Mr. Parks on this one. I think, we years ago when we deployed the rovers, we bought holsters for everybody and said you pick up your rover on the way out. We designed a system to do that. It sounds to me like you've designed an incredibly bureaucratic system of checks and balances to make this thing work. And the flaw is one person doesn't do their job right, the whole system collapses. Mr. Zine talked about what happens if, and there's also what happens if you have a UO. A division goes upside down, and it happens all the time in South Bureau, where your division's totally consumed by a shooting or whatever. You've got people coming in from another division to pick up their patrol functions. You don't know what's out there even, because you're splitting that division up. So what 4 cars go here and what 4 car goes there, you don't have any control of that. So I'm really concerned at this design, and I think the idea would be buy more holsters, give them to everybody like we did with the Rovers, and say you check them out on the way out the door. We do that with shotguns, we do it with Rovers now, we do it with radios, cars, photo kits. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we check out, and in fact, going to a car these days takes both officers to carry all the crap they got to carry out to the car. So I think the idea of pooling makes a lot more sense than this really bureaucratic over-administrative system, and I concur with them.
Okay. Just so you know, the pooling has not always worked, though, and that's in the past, and that's why we went to some of them for the specialized tasers. If we're going to do it that way, then it's going to be a longer time before you get them deployed because of the training aspect, because that means everybody has to be trained. So there's pros and cons to doing it both ways. I'm not disputing that pooling isn't the best way, but
Well,
it
you're
is
going to be
easier
training them
to
anyway
track.
before they get the gun.
But it is easier to track the taser if it's assigned to the individual. But I understand what your concerns are, and we'll take it
Versus a
back.
division at a time when you train an entire division and roll them out. You're saying just pick and choose the people that got them and have them trained?
Correct. It is a lot easier to do it that way. But it is, the tasers do, we were going to assign them just like we do a firearms, and the gun card and everything else, they get the serial number, and that does help us. It actually minimizes the bureaucracy for tracking versus maximizes it. But I understand what all of your concerns are, and I'll take it back, and we'll work
That would
on
be
it.
great if we had all those units. It would be great if we could equip it for everyone. We wouldn't have that issue about pooling. But whenever we get there, we don't know.
So I think, so the motion is going to be that we'll go forward with this, but we're going to ask after the first quarter of use in this system, they're going to report back on how it's working.
Yeah, but I think we
What
need to
about-
make, I think that what we need is that we need to purchase them.
Yeah.
And I think
That's-
we need to report back before they're deployed as to what the deployment system and whether they got the holsters and all that stuff.
And what I'm hearing from all of you is you want standardized guidelines, which we planned on doing anyway, but you won't accept anything but pooling. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, deployment,
Well-
concern is deployment in the field.
Deployment, yeah. I mean, that's the only
Okay.
way I can see you get them out in the field.
Okay. All right.
Well, look, thank you for that presentation, and look forward to Mr. White drafting a report consistent with Mr. Zine, Mr. Smith's, and Mr. Parks's questions.
Mr. Chair, so this will go to council, this will go to council.
I didn't pause that.
Yeah, you never do.
Council
and-
This will go to council authorizing the purchase, but the deployment will come back to this committee
Have another discussion.
for further review. So the purchase order will go through, but the deployment will be held until we figure out how that's going to be done based upon the department's review.
Okay.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. And the bottom line is that the city's going to move forward with the purchase of the tasers, and that's what's critical. The bottom line is that moves forward.
And hopefully they won't
And
come
we
back
want,
with a lot of dust.
and the more tasers that are purchased over the years, the less the concerns that were expressed here will matter, because they will be disseminated more and more broadly throughout the department. And so, I mean, if I understand the concerns that Park Smith and Zine are raising today, those are really concerns that could be conceptualized as what happens when you have a large department and not enough tasers to go around.
It's coverage.
And so the longer this proceeds, the more it is perceived as a success that is good for officer safety, that's good for protecting the public, and that frankly reduces liability because you're shooting fewer people. The more tasers the department will have, and the less these concerns will be a concern. Is that a fair
Right,
statement?
Exactly.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much, Chief.
Going to make you earn that star.
Item 4, communication from the mayor relative to the submission of an application to the State Office of Homeland Security for the 2008 Urban Area Security Initiative for a share of $781 million grant award and governing body resolution.
Deputy Mayor Ali Khan, welcome.
Good morning, members of the committee and Mr. Chairman. My name is Arif Ali Khan. I'm the Deputy Mayor of Homeland Security and Public Safety. Seated with me at the table is Laura Shin. She's the Grants Director for the Mayor's Office. As you know,
Give us a synopsis, so just so folks are clear that this is go ahead and just give us a little synopsis.
certainly, this is a notification of the council pursuant to the administrative code regarding the submission of an application for the Urban Area Security Initiative, a grant given by the Department of Homeland Security for counterterrorism and Homeland Security efforts. The mayor's office, as the fiscal agent for the Long Beach, Los Angeles urban area, which involves 26 partner jurisdictions in the county of Los Angeles, submitted an application, I believe, after the solicitation was received on March 7, 2008. On February 1st, the Department of Homeland Security announced that 60 urban areas throughout the nation were eligible to apply for a competitive share of $781 million. Under the statute issued by Congress, the Tier 1 UASI regions are entitled to 55% of that award. Los Angeles and Long Beach urban area is one of the, I believe, 5 urban areas that qualifies for that. Each urban area is eligible to apply for up to $120 million in funds, and that application was submitted by submitting what are known as investment justifications. These are particular areas in which the urban area seeks to invest the money for a specific outcome, such as interoperability, critical infrastructure protection, and other areas. In the past, we have used various strategies in applying for this grant. Last year, for example, the strategy was to invest in 9 different investment justifications in a variety of areas and ultimately submitting 150 different projects. We were cut last year by approximately 10%, so we reevaluated our approach to applying for this grant. The grant is awarded through a somewhat complex formula, but the areas within our control are within the application. So after doing a review of our application process last year and also looking at the awards that were given to other competitor jurisdictions, we decided to take a different approach. First and foremost, we hired a consultant who had extensive experience on how to apply for these competitive grants. We narrowed the investment justifications to essentially 4. The first one is Interoperable Communications. That is primarily to go towards the LA Regional Interoperability Communications Systems Project, or LA-RICS, which is a regional interoperability project to enable law enforcement, fire, emergency management, and many other responders to all communicate on the same radio systems, which currently does not exist, not even between critical agencies such as the fire department, between the LA Fire and the LA County Fire, for example. The second area was in the area of information sharing. That's typically exchange of information between law enforcement agencies, particular to intelligence issues, funding for the Joint Regional Intelligence Center and other types of fusion centers. The third area was critical infrastructure and key resource protection, specifically targeting commercial airports and the seaports. For example, additional hardening of targets, especially at LAX, license plate recognition, under vehicle inspection, and those types of things. And then finally, the fourth category was basically we referred to it as a legacy projects. In other words, projects that needed additional funding to close out those projects, complete them, and that would no longer need further funding through the UASI process. This approach is much more narrowed. It also reduced the number of projects that we would be doing, and also prioritizing the need for interoperable communications, especially in a county of 88 jurisdictions and numerous police, fire, and other agencies. As you may know, on July 25th, the Department of Homeland Security officially released the funding amounts for the Tier 1 and Tier 2 UASI regions. For the Tier 1 areas, including Los Angeles, received a decrease in funding of 3%, which was capped at 3%, with a total award of $70.4 million compared to the $72.6 that we received last year. There were 3 Tier 1 areas that received increases in funding, including the Bay Area of approximately 8.8%, New York 7.5%, and Houston received a substantial increase of 50%. Obviously, we were very concerned about this award determination, how it was done, the formula that was actually used in doing so. In terms of we've had several discussions with the Department of Homeland Security about this. Basically, what they were saying is this year they used a different population calculation using the Metropolitan Statistical Areas, or the MSAs, which had a negative effect on us. Yes.
No, I mean, look, any methodology that ever concludes that Houston deserves an increase in the same year that LA deserves a decrease is flawed. I mean, it's a mistake, and I hope we were really vigorous and strong with DHS in making that clear, rather than being accommodating and, understanding, which I've seen in the past, and which, in my view, when you are accommodating and understanding, which the city has been for a couple of years, this is what you get. They keep dinging us. We keep losing.
I can assure you we were very vigorous in our response to the
But
Department of Homeland
in
Security.
the past, we haven't been.
Yes.
In the past, we've been, keep it down. Let's keep controversy down. Let's play nice with them, and they keep dinging us. That's my view.
In addition, we've been contacting our congressional delegation, many of whom are also upset and concerned about this. In particular, we are still awaiting further clarification of how actually the formula was applied. One of the things that the Department of Homeland Security doesn't do is provide us what the ultimate formula score was for each of the jurisdictions. So we really don't know how we actually
It's a simple
compare.
calculation. It's based on population plus one person. That person was Nancy Pelosi for San Francisco and George Bush for Houston. That's the population calculation. I can figure that out.
In terms of the application itself, one thing that is very different this year than has been in the past is the scoring of our application, which is approximately 20% of the purported formula. This year we scored actually a 94 out of 100 compared to last year where we had 60. The comments on our score were quite positive regarding our focus to prioritize investments, specifically with the emphasis on the interoperability component. But of course, that's only a portion of the score, and there are many other factors that were used, including this changed population area. One bright spot, if you look at the Homeland Security grants in its totality, although we received a $2 million cut in the UASI grant, when you combine it with the other categories of funding for Homeland Security, the transportation security grants, port security grants, a catastrophic planning grant of approximately $6 million, Los Angeles actually received an additional $20.6 million in fiscal year 2008 funds. So in addition, the state also received additional funding, 80% of which is supposed to be invested in the region. So overall, the region is doing well. Obviously, we're still disappointed with this particular grant and receiving the 3% cut.
And in any event, the item that's before us today is not
The acceptance of the grant.
In Houston, LA, you have a problem. It's a decision of last week. It's the next year. It's the next application.
No. It's for the fiscal year 2008 application of which the award was announced. The application was submitted, a motion, and then a transmittal was submitted notifying council of that application. The fiscal year 2009 process won't proceed until the end of the year.
Questions, colleagues?
On the $781 million, how much did the state take off of that?
Of the award that comes to the city of the LA Long Beach urban area, they take 20% of the award. So of the $70.4 million, they would take 20% of that award.
And what's that taken for?
That is taken for their administrative costs as well as investments in either statewide or regional Homeland Security efforts.
So we do all the work, we get the grant, and they take 20% without doing anything?
Well, we submit our application to the state, and then they send it over. But by statute,
No, but you're right. I mean, the state has, in my view, I mean, the state of California has no Homeland Security functionality except press conferences, and that costs about 20% of the grant every year.
I just thought it was amazing that they cut us, and the state takes their fee. We can't get it direct to put, obviously, more security to enhance it even greater than it is. So
that is one of the frustrations in this program. As in many things, Los Angeles, especially Los Angeles, Long Beach urban area, is a unique entity. It's a huge population, several governments. That system may work in smaller states where the state would have a broader Homeland Security responsibility, but here in California, it's definitely unique.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. I had heard some weeks or months ago that we were getting a big cut in the harbor this year. Was that the 3%, or is there a bigger cut there and just it balances out the 3 for everything?
When you say the harbor, you're regarding the port security?
Port security, yeah.
I believe actually they received an increase. I don't
they
know the
did.
precise number, but we can get that information to you.
All right, it's good. I thought that was the other way around, that we had
Something on
a,
the news about the cut
I thought there was.
last
yeah.
week.
I'll have to investigate.
If you would.
My office doesn't administer that grant. It's actually
Oh.
done by the Port of Los
Except-
Angeles.
Okay, so when they talk about some infrastructure, that's not including the port here.
No, this, in this UASI process, we did want to focus on ports and airports, so we're using a portion of this money to apply to the ports and the airports. But in addition, there is a separate port security grant that's awarded by the Department of Homeland Security, administered by the Port of LA, and we can find out the
Yeah,
numbers
I
and
appreciate
supply
it, just
them.
for information purposes. And while I've got the microphone, if I could, I'd like to commend Arif and his staff. Last week during the earthquake, they knew the mayor was out of town. They knew that Mr. Garcetti was out of town. They immediately, within minutes, were in touch with Wendy Gruhl, who was acting mayor. As information came in, you sequestered her, brought her back, said, you got to sit down and do this. I just thought you were very professional in the way you did that. It was very instantaneous, very clean, easy, no issues, and make sure that the acting mayor got the information, the council got the information, and thank God we had no problems. But just the way you respond, I just want to commend you for that. So
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Now, if Dennis Zine had been acting mayor.
Well, let's not talk about earthquake. Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions on the item? Send it forward. Thank you very much for that presentation.
Mr. Chair, you have amendments before you on this item, I believe, that if you wish to adopt those in lieu of the original mayor's report.
Deal.
Yeah, we just have some technical adjustments, adding the attachment and the additional 2 recommendations, authority for council to authorize the application and the CAO to report back.
As included in your handout?
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll do that.
Thank you.
That's the last item, Mr. White.
It is in your regular agenda. You also have a special agenda scheduled this morning.
Oh, the special agenda is, would you call that, please, Mr. White?
Item 1 on the special agenda is a CA report relative to a police department contract with Motorola Incorporated in the amount of $2.57 million and for a term of 6 years for the replacement of the city's burglar alarm and permit management system.
Are there questions on this item, colleagues?
I just have one request.
there was.
Because, no, just one, because this covers 2 or 3 different departments and are ongoing, if we can ask that this system go under the umbrella of the city's major system oversight committee, which is the mayor's office, CLA-CAO, and the ad hoc member is the ITA.
Sounds like fun. Okay. We'll add that request as a instruction of this committee, and with that, we'll approve the item. No more cards, no more hands, no more committee. Thank you, Mr. White.
Thank you, sir.